entrepreneurs and executives run their businesses with a renewed focus on integrity and resist the temptation to fake it, which only sabotages success.
Yes, friends, we have Sabrina Horn with us in our show today. And Sabrina is a renowned PR expert, and she is coming up with an interesting book, Make It, Don't Fake It. We will spend some time on the book, and we will learn about the PR hacks and tips and tricks that exist today. And with that, Sabrina, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Beautiful. So let's talk about your journey. What brought you to the world of PR? Walk us through uh, the exciting world of PR.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's a little too exciting. Yes, I mean, I'm a career public relations professional. I'm a child of German immigrants. They are both self-made entrepreneurs, and so I always had that in my DNA and had a passion to someday hang out my own shingle. Which I did after only 4 or 5 years of business experience. So I knew enough to be dangerous, but I had no leadership or management training. And I started the Horn Group, which was my public relations firm, specifically for the technology industry when I was 29 years old. So now you know how old I am. It was in 1991. And we work with thousands of startups and all of their CEOs, the venture capitalists, the whole ecosystem of the tech industry. And we started off in Silicon Valley. Then we went to Boston. We had an office in New York. Also, we were in Seattle for a cup of coffee when the internet bubble burst. We didn't have very good timing there. But over 24 years, we put a lot of companies on the map, right, and built up their brands, and some of them went public, some of them were acquired, and of course, other startups don't make it. And then after about 20 years, I started to think, what should I do next? So ultimately, my firm was successfully acquired by Finn Partners in 2015. And they are a global marketing consultancy, about 100 million in billings. I ran their technology practice for 3 years and then decided it was time to do something else, spend some time with family and write a book. So here we are.
Awesome. I think what I found fascinating, and we'll talk about the book very soon. So what I find fascinating about the timing of the Horn Group and your journey through PR is disruption through technology. So Amazon was coming in, Google came in. We saw dot-com buzz. We saw a lot of evolution happening. A lot of way the consumer habits change, and PR to many degrees, the messaging of it very related to that. So walk us through the evolution, what that you have seen of PR as an industry. That will be helpful.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, back in the early 1990s, public relations was much more of a tactical function of marketing. It was all about grinding out press releases. And in Silicon Valley, there were maybe only a handful of firms who were considered to be strategic public relations agencies. And I worked for one of them. It was called Blanc and Otis. And, I learned a lot from Maureen Blanc and Simone Otis, who were the co-founders of that firm. But that was really kind of what I thought was the ticket to not just execute and grind out press releases, but to offer thought and strategy on what messages are the right ones to lead with and what customers really want to hear, what a value proposition is. For example, a small thing, but very important. And so, I think public relations as a profession evolved from being tactical to becoming really like one of the most strategic functions within a company, advising the C-suite and operating with a seat at the board level. And it's not just about publicity anymore. It's more than just earned media, right? It's really about all forms of communication to reach any audience you need to reach, whether it's through social media or even through advertising or through video, and yes, even still through a press release. That's all public relations. And I would say the best public relations today, the most strategic public relations, is all about risk assessment, where you're advising, whether it's your own CEO or your client, what are the threats and opportunities you have to consider as you move forward, and then coming up with a communication plan to support it.
Interesting. And as an entrepreneur who is basically either riding this wave or going through this wave, how should, like, what are some of the common pitfalls that you have seen that businesses fall into when it comes to their understanding of what PR firm is and what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, so there's a few. I mean, the worst is right when you have an executive who comes to you and says, "We have a crisis. Can you make it go away?" And that's not the job of PR. It's to deal with it, and to navigate through a crisis and come out the other side. Another pitfall is, when marketing executives say, we just want to be like that company over there. Can you just make us be like them? And it doesn't work that way. You cannot put lipstick on a pig, and you can't paint your Prius red and make it run like a Ferrari. Like you have to be authentic. But it just really comes down to, like, it's not about spin. It's not about being something that you're not. It just doesn't work that way.
Interesting. And I think it's interesting you're saying that. So I was talking briefly with you before this session. So whenever you read any book from a PR executive, whether it's Ryan Holiday and all that, it looks like a John Grisham novel when it comes to crisis management. It's fascinating that how much spin and how much things are going are. So I think it's a refreshing thought from hearing from you is, okay, just do things right. So
Yeah, exactly. Like, there are plenty of examples, right? But another common mistake is when you're too big for your britches and you're way out over your skis. It's not uncommon to find CEOs in Silicon Valley who have a head full of steam, and they're it's good to have a vision, but you still have to be operating from a basis of where you are today and reality. But it's also on the other side of the spectrum. More established brands can fall into the pitfalls of becoming complacent, where they're not innovating anymore. So what they're communicating isn't fresh, and they don't do the right research, right? And there's so many examples, like Harley Davidson, for example, right? Motorcycle, Rough Rider, right? They decided to get into the perfume business. Didn't work. Cosmopolitan magazine for women decided to get into the yogurt business. Like, people just wanted to buy a magazine. They didn't want yogurt. So, that's where, like, you have to get centered again. And that's where public relations and marketing really play a very strategic role.
Interesting. So I was talking to one of the largest automakers, and and we were talking about sort of their adoption into electric cars, and this was like 7 years back. So there was no Tesla's conversation. It was just coming up, and people were skeptical. So and they were talking to me, hey, you know what? I have this massive PR firm, and they can put, as you said, lipstick on the pig. So if I ask them to do it, they do the magic, and you can sort of see that aspect that many times businesses look at these PR firms as those, like, wonder organization, or basically Hogwarts, where they can turn things around. and make nothing or something from nothing. So what has been your observation in the industry as a PR executive? What role is PR playing today in ensuring that like,
Yeah.
there is not too much fictitious stuff going on? Like, what's your take?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly that has been the case, what you described. And my firm was guilty of it also. Um, um, in the long run, what happens is that whatever it is you're putting out there is isn't really very authentic or may not be exactly the truth. And then the truth comes out because the company cannot deliver. So, for example, you have this great new product and it's going to do all of these wonderful things, right? And, the company has no customers, no references, right? This is the first thing a good reporter wants when they talk to you is which of your customers can I talk to? Oh, well, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Right? And um, so like it's a short-term strategy that just doesn't play out in the long term because the truth it always comes out. And I think in the wake of COVID and the pandemic and the current climate, getting back to like authenticity and what is the truth is even more paramount. Like people are so tired of fake news, and fake it till you make it is right in that genre, right? People want to know what is the truth. They want to know that it's not going to change tomorrow or next week. And of course, sometimes it does. The truth unfolds with time in a crisis. But right now, public relations is all about like it's just the truth. And sometimes the truth may not be very sexy, but it's better, right, to operate that way in general, and especially right now.
Interesting. And so that's an interesting point. So if you talk about technology industries, or if you talk about, so right now almost every technology is disrupting, or they are disrupted, they are the disruptors, or they are being disrupted. Depends on which category you fall into. In both the scenarios, as you rightly pointed out, that when you're not having too much action happening, and you are the one causing a lot of action, right? And you don't have any product release, the product stays the same, but it's disrupting, right? So when you are in a disruptive times, if how would you think of a PR when there's a lot of chaos happening in your industry? Because no one wants a Me Too product. Everyone wants to be different. But when you see that the market is so obscure, that the product is so obscure, everything is getting disrupted. What's your take?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, that's like the guerrilla warfare of marketing, right? Like, there's always the 800-pound gorilla or the 500-pound gorilla. And then, there's the number two or the number three player, and then there's everybody else. And it's very noisy and very crowded, and people start all sounding like they're saying the same thing. So good public relations there has to try and find a different angle on the story, right? It's in the end of the day, it's all about telling a story within the confines of course, the truth, right? That sends a compelling message to people who might care, to get them to listen or to embrace it. And that's when you have to go into your creative group, right? Is there a survey that you can issue and ask some very provocative questions, right? Getting out of your comfort zone and asking questions that make people uncomfortable, still that can lead back to sort of a core value proposition, but catches the attention of people, can cut through the noise, right? And then there are also things that companies do that have perhaps more of a budget, like using celebrities, for example, to support a cause, or CEOs who write books. to create an argument for what their vision and their technology is. So, that's when you have to get really creative and use all of the things that are in your wheelhouse and those that are not. I remember once this was back in the late 90s, we were launching a company that made one of the first workflow engines, workflow technology, right? And we put on a show with actors on a stage on Broadway and invited the press to come to see a different way of presenting this information than from a regular old boring press conference. So, you do what you have to do to get the attention, right? And that was absolutely 100% authentic, because we were saying, what was true about it, and we had even customers on stage, So that's where you have to get creative to stand out.
Interesting. And if you're an entrepreneur, so from your vantage point, what are businesses or startups doing it wrong when it comes to PR, or their approach to PR, or their approach to brand building? What are some of the common issues that you have seen that they're easy to fix, that businesses are doing it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Like, a lot of startups don't spend enough time thinking about who they are, and they talk more about what their solution is than the problem that they're solving, right? They haven't fully defined their value proposition. And so when you create a brand, by definition, a brand is the emotional connection that a company has with customers, hopefully, right? And it creates trust. And so what startups often do is they don't want to do all the work to create a brand. They're moving so fast. But what they're saying isn't connecting with prospects. They haven't properly defined the value proposition that strikes the hearts and minds of the people they wanted to talk to. And in some ways, it begins with understanding very clearly who you are and what your company's values are, and stating those. I know so many startups, when we would talk to them and we would say, well, so what are your company values, right? Because it plays into the story. And they just say, well, we drink beers on Thursday nights, and, we have a mission statement over the front door. Those aren't values. Values are like integrity or creativity. And then from there, how do those values infuse your business processes, right? And that comes out in your story and how you serve customers and how you respond to them and fix problems. And when your CEO is going to get out there and admit a mistake because something didn't work, right, rather than shoving it under the rug, so startups have a hard time doing that because they're moving so fast. And you might say that those are some of the softer things, right, to do to building a brand, but they are essential. They're the foundation.
That's a very good point. And on that note, so when should a startup think about having a PR strategy? Like, what's your take on when should I be considering, okay, let me talk to either a PR agency, or at least get myself attuned to these couple of common tactics?
Right. Okay. So there's a two-part answer to that. I mean, first of all, you have to have the basics. You have to have a product or a service that works. You have to have at least 3 or 4, a handful of customers who are beyond the proof of concept stage, who are actually using it, or paying customers, who might be willing to talk about their experience using the technology, or why they bought it, right? I mean, that's table stakes. There are other things that are important, like a vision, a go-to-market strategy, an executive team with a broad bench, and good financing to support the effort. But at that point, if you're like a B or a C round venture funded company with these other caveats in place I just mentioned, that would be the time. to engage a firm, to help you set strategy and execute. But having said that, the other answer to your question is sometimes companies are such huge disruptors, right? They need the message out sooner. They want to make a big splash in the market with their strategy and their vision, even though they don't have the actual technology functioning yet. And then it may make sense, right, to start to prime the market, to educate the market about what this disruptive technology means, because it takes a while for a market to embrace it, right, and to accept it and to understand it, even. So there may be cases where you want to start earlier, right, even in a seed round, and doing things kind of, very focused, not spray and pray, but putting some content out there, having your CEO give a talk at a conference, seeing and being seen in different venues, to start to build a little bit of air cover. That may make sense.
Wonderfully put on. And on that note, so walk us through some other techniques, some other strategies that are pretty frugal for a startup to execute, and that will pave way for indulging, or at least getting the word out while they can or may not be able to afford a good PR firm. What are some of the easy to adopt techniques, as you rightly pointed out, CEO being out there talking and all that fun stuff? So walk us through some other strategies that exist today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's also talk about, PR firms, right? They come in all shapes and sizes. There are huge firms that are, global agencies with offices around the world. If you're a startup, do you need that? No. There are mid-sized agencies that sometimes offer more than just public relations. They also can handle your social media, or maybe think you might need a video, or they have good writing services. And they are sort of like more in the small to medium size range, right? And depending on what your goals are, they may be perfect. But if you're a startup and you're a seed round or A round company, and you're still trying to get your beta customers to have a good experience, right? You don't need an agency. Maybe you just need a good freelancer or a contractor who has been in the industry for a while and can help you start to create some content. Even starting to post on LinkedIn, it is very useful to start to build a base level of awareness. And then when you're ready to kind of announce that, you're on the map, you have these customers, you have this funding behind you, these are your executives, that's when you want to start to broaden the bench and maybe scale from a contractor freelancer to a small firm. And a small firm might be like 3 or 4 people, and plenty of them now. So there are many different options, and you have to match the right solution, PR solution, to where your business is at and the type of business you have as well.
Interesting. And if you talk about how much of a startup's focus should be, or resources should be allocated towards the PR, like, do you have any benchmarks that a typical startup should put up set number of resources for their PR effort? Like, do you have any such benchmarks that you could share?
I mean, that's tough to answer because it depends upon the kind of company you are and what stage you're at. I've seen seed round funded companies spend $10,000 to $15,000 a month because it was a B2C play, and they need to educate a market about a disruptive technology, so they needed to make that investment. But I've also seen $3,000 or $4,000 a month until the company has more of its assets in place, and sometimes it's not PR at all. Sometimes you don't want PR because you don't want to announce that you have these executives or that you got this funding, because the competition will start to sniff around, and snoop around and maybe make things difficult for you. So sometimes it's better to just start to create a little bit of content on LinkedIn, get a few articles published maybe, but not start to go big and talking to reporters, all the time. So there is no one size fits all here. Most, I would say most startups start off with an in-house person just banging out some copy, right? And then you go from there.
That's a fair point. And I'm curious. So, in your journey helping out a lot of businesses, can you walk us through some of the success stories where you were impressed with what the startups were doing, like some of the innovative ways they are making themselves, their presence felt in the industry, and if you can walk us through some of those cases, if you have anything to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of these examples, might be a little bit older now, but there's always a degree of complexity involved with each one of them. So I'll give you two examples. In the 1990s, my first client. It was PeopleSoft, which made HR software, but it was based on a new computing platform, which was called client server computing, right? And they had a more complicated message to tell that needed to be urgently told and simplified in order to get customers to want to even take a look, because everybody was on a mainframe back then. And PeopleSoft was not the safe buy. IBM is the safe buy, and that saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right? But what PeopleSoft did, and what a lot of other companies back then did, was very clearly and simply lead off not with who they were, but how they were doing things differently and what problem they were solving, right? And why that problem was not being solved by other solutions. And by leading with that, they immediately connected with the pain factor that prospects had and were able to draw them in. The second thing they did was in creating a new category of enterprise software. They also really leveraged their culture and their values. So PeopleSoft CEO was a man named Dave Duffield, who was already an accomplished software executive. And he really led the charge in Silicon Valley at that time, when values and culture were not a thing. They were not important. And he really, he didn't use it as a marketing strategy on purpose. It was really just who he was. And he became known for that. And then it became like, wow, this company's culture is amazing. And they care about their customers so much. They were like the white horse, and everybody thought they were the darling. But it was because they stood for quality customer service and innovation, and because their executive team all kind of embodied the same purpose and vision. So it was a smashing success, right? Other companies use a different approach, and they're the dark horse, and they sling mud at the competition, and they use competitive warfare and guerrilla warfare, and and they have a reputation for that. It doesn't mean that they weren't successful. Some of them did achieve success with that, but you attract a certain kind of customer that way, and it's your brand and it's your reputation. And I would give one more example, if you like. More recently, Forbes, we know Forbes magazine, they went through a huge transformation of their business from being a print publisher to digital publishing, and they had to change their entire business model in order really to survive, right? Forbes also was a family-run business, and had kind of more of a reputation that had perhaps stagnated a bit and wasn't fresh or innovative anymore. So they brought along a man named Mike Perlis, who was the first non-family member CEO. And he engineered this whole digital transformation and this strategy over a number of years. And the challenge was that we had to get the reporters who were being laid off
Mm.
to write the story about this, right? Because at that time, right, a lot of companies in the publishing industry were letting go of their longstanding reporters. USA Today, Dow Jones. I mean, all of these magazines, right, many of them, Fortune, Time, Newsweek, they all shrunk their staff as the industry changed. And so the challenge was to find someone who would take a meeting and would listen to the story that we had to tell. So ultimately, it was a success because the transformation used good technology, the strategy was well executed, and they were sold to, I believe, a Chinese holding company, and the family still owns a small percentage of it. So two very different examples, right? But at the end of the day, it all came down to sort of like, what is our strategy? What are our core values, and what are we going to stick to, right? That's important. And it takes so much time. It's when you're a startup, you just rush, and you don't have a memory of time, but building a brand and changing market perception takes time and building credibility.
And I'm curious. So when someone approach you for
Mhm.
they're needing some PR help, they're needing some brand perception built and all, have you ever rejected someone saying no, you're not designed, or you are too hard to deal with? Like, do you have certain stories that where either the culture is the bottleneck, or like help us understand the structure of an organization that's very hard to 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 do the PR for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, how much time do you have? Because I have so many stories. Like, yes, absolutely. I mean, in a way, we became sort of like a venture capitalist, right? You interview your prospects, you know, to see if their strategy is viable.
Mm,
And, they think, oh, just, go make us be larger than life and, spin the story. Well, like, no, like,
mm,
when is your product shipping? Who is using it? How much money do you have in the bank? Sometimes we even asked for their business plan. And we spoke to their venture capitalists to understand why they invested in these companies. And sometimes, yes, we turned them down because either their strategy we felt was too much like many other companies, and it would be too difficult to make them stand out, that they didn't have enough of a differentiating message, right? Or their ideas were simply crazy or unethical, right? Like we thought there's no way we can be successful for company ABC, because right at the end of the day we have to not only protect our own reputation, but we present these stories to the press
mm,
and to analysts with whom we have very hard won and trusted relationships, and you can blow it with one company. So we have to give them good information so they can do their jobs too. And there were times we fired clients. I mean, clients where there was CEO turnover or they were abusive to the staff. During the recession when money was tight, I had no problem saying, see ya,
mm.
because you don't get to treat my people that way. So yeah.
Interesting. And so recently we have heard horror stories with companies like WeWork. We have heard horror stories like with companies with Uber. So
Mhm.
what is the role of a PR firm then? So is it so I'm curious to understand. So is it always about on a firefighting mode, crisis management, or it could be an inward focused as well, where it could say, okay, no, I'll give you 2 years to fix this, till we must, like, walk us through some of, like, what are, how could a business engage with PR firm through when they're going through this inner reflections, as they're progressing.
In a crisis mode or just in general?
In general, and they know there's something going on which might turn out tomorrow. It's not out
Yeah,
yet.
right. Okay. So, I mean, in those situations, right, you have to really get to know the company and you have to get under their skin and peel back the onion, like what's really going on here. And like when we would have a client that would say, well, Sabrina, you don't really need to know about all that. And I'm thinking like, oh, yes, I do. And right. So you have to really understand, like, I hate this phrase, but like what their dirty laundry is, right? Because then you have to do crisis planning. And we all learned from the pandemic, right? Nobody ever expected that we would have a COVID. But it's a great example of how you have to be prepared for the unimaginable. And it can happen at any time, right? It can be an earthquake, there could be a huge cyber attack, right? And you have to have, or a company has a product defect that it's hiding and it might come out, right? You have to have crisis plans in place for what you're going to do when that happens. And this is quite a process, right? I mean, you involve your board, your leadership team, you have contingency plans, business continuity plans, and many boards require that these are submitted, right, to a governance committee. When you're a startup, you know, you don't have to go to those lengths, but you still have to think through what are you going to do? You know, if you can't do business or your people suddenly have to work from home, or you know the product isn't working, and one of your customer posts about that on social media. What are you going to do? So you have these plans in place, and it's a blueprint, right? It's a foundation from which you might then operate. And when a crisis is actually unfolding, you're revising that plan in real time. And sometimes you revise your plan every day because reality is like happening in real time, right? So sometimes you just want to get to tomorrow, forget about next month, right? And I think that that's what you know a lot of companies, small businesses had to do during COVID because the information was constantly changing. But all that being said, one of the basic things that entrepreneurs and CEOs can do for their startups is to develop a Q&A. And what that means is, what is the list of the questions you don't want to get? The ones that will make you squirm in your seat, that you don't want to answer. You have to be prepared to answer them. You have to come up with an answer, and it's not no comment and I'll get back to you later, right? You have to think through what you would say in that case, and you know make sure you have your legal counsel involved if necessary. You know, a PR person, right? But so then what you have is like a basic construct where you hope for the best, plan for the worst, and you have the confidence that you can sort of navigate somewhere in the middle. And I mean, for any company these days, after what we've just been through with COVID, I would recommend that you really think about that if you're a founder.
I think that's a fascinating idea and scary to
Yeah.
pick out. I think that's great thoughts. So now let's come to the meat of the stuff. So make it, don't fake it. By the way, very clever title. Walk us through the history. Why title it this way?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think if you look at my career, right, was a 29-year-old CEO with no leadership management training, and I'm starting a company. I was one of very few female CEOs in Silicon Valley then, trying to grow my own company and offering benefits and solving problems, and you know, growing an operation, expanding geographically, offering new services. But I was also a PR advisor to so many other executives and saw the leadership problems that they were dealing with. And you kind of see that from two lenses, right? And it was all about helping them be successful or helping my company be successful. And the number of times we took a left turn, or, they or the client faked it, or, even procrastinating and delaying a decision can create a bigger problem for yourself, right, than taking action. And so I just, it's my life story, right? And so I felt like the worst thing that you can do as an entrepreneur or a CEO, or, all the Gen Zers, the millennials building their careers, right, is to operate, with some sort of, other form of reality. Like, you have to operate with integrity and authenticity. And the phrase "fake it till you make it" is the worst business advice I've ever heard. So that my book is designed to give you examples of how to be successful and avoid that trap.
Interesting. And I think well said, because I even so as we discussed a few minutes back. So if you talk to a PR company, many times they are the wizard. They're the wizardry in your perception, right? Sometimes they are doing things, making it happen, making you shine way brighter than what your actually shine should have been, or you should have. So what are you suggesting on that? So is your recommendation that exaggeration is wrong, or like what are you trying to communicate through this book? I'm curious to understand.
Yeah. So in my book, I outline, like, there's a spectrum of ways you can fake it, from the innocent to total fraud and deception, right? And most of us operate sort of somewhere in the middle, maybe, right? And so what does that look like? It's the entrepreneur who exaggerates what his technology can do to the venture capitalist to get funding. It's the salesperson who overpromises what the product can do to a customer. It's the person who's applying for a job and they put down they went to some university that they never went to, right? It happens a lot. And what happens in most of those cases, right? The VC will discover through due diligence that the technology does not perform as promised. The customer is going to find out that the product doesn't work as promised, right? And the employer, the HR department, is going to, do some checking, and they'll find out that the person lied on their resume. So in all of those cases, right, you're going to be exposed, and faking it, exaggerating the truth, omitting the truth, right? Or minimizing the truth, not telling the whole story, right? You're going to be exposed. And while you're waiting to be exposed, you're going to be living with the anxiety and the knowledge, right, that you lied, basically. And so the point is, like, that's never a good idea, right? Like, think in another example. Why would you want to go see a dentist to get your wisdom teeth removed, to a dentist who faked, his education or his training? Why would you want to go to a lawyer who faked, cheated on his bar exam, right? Why would you want to get married to a person who's a fraud, right? I mean, it just, like, why? You're going to be exposed. It's a total waste of time. And you lose your reputation, or, in the case of Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, we know what happened to her, right? Bernie Madoff, with his Ponzi scheme. I mean, he died, passed away a few weeks ago, but it's just not a good idea.
So help me understand. So is faking it lying? So what is, from your vantage point, what is fake and what is a lie? I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah. So you don't have to lie in order to fake it, right? I mean, there's I have this diagram. It's called the fakeometer. And the fakeometer starts with, like, you're just acting as if you're telling a little white lie when somebody, says, do I look good in this dress? And your husband says, oh yeah, sure, you look great. Like, it's harmless. But then you cross the line when you start to lie or change the truth at the expense of someone else. Sometimes, though, you can fake it and you're not lying. Here's an example. During the internet bubble and then bust of 2000 and 2001, There were so many companies, hundreds of companies, right, who had business models that just were not sustainable. They hadn't been thought through. And at that time, I was 8 months pregnant with my second daughter, Christina. And we were losing clients left and right. I mean, it was collateral damage everywhere because these startups were shutting down overnight, or they cut back their budgets. And this business I worked so hard to build started to shrink in front of me. And I just couldn't handle it. I was overwhelmed. I looked the other way. I pretended it would all get better. And I was faking it because I wasn't dealing with reality. So my point is, you don't have to lie to be faking it, right? You can also be an entrepreneur who's just simply doesn't know what to do. And you're not dealing with reality, so you're not making the right business decisions and putting your company and its employees at risk.
That's a very interesting point. When you were talking about the idea of faking it, so I was thinking of this one conversation I had this with a CEO of a unicorn company, decently successful, and we were talking about this. I think Theranos situation that we talked about. The recently news came out. It was all fad. It was all baloney, right? And I was talking to him and I said, okay, how do you interpret this, right? So you have a successful company, you have achieved whatever you have achieved, you have asked for big promises, you are delivering some of those promises, but obviously, so he gave me a very interesting perspective. He said, Vishal, you know what is entrepreneurship in general? He said, like as an entrepreneur, our job is, it's like a trapeze artist, right? So you jump and you hope by the time you land, there's on the other side a ledge waiting for you to grab. And I
Okay.
said that's a pretty wild way to describe it. But say, isn't that if you look at any, so we are raising, and then we look for either an exit or a perception or a acquisition which justifies that we stand on the ground that we portray. And many of the businesses he was suggesting are built on this ideology, right? Create a buzz, then justify the buzz, then create further buzz, and so it's like a fabulous PR hack, where so he said that, now imagine from Elizabeth's point of view, right? Maybe what she was trying to do is sort of achievable, and she's just huddling herself to make it happen before she get caught. And
Mhm.
had she been able to deliver on, and he was saying that, and in my journey, I was Elizabeth at some point in my journey as well, where some of the things I know I'm pushing it, but I have this faint feeling that maybe I can achieve it. So what is your take as a peer executive listening to this rant?
Yeah. I mean, that it's a really important question, right? Because sometimes you do have to put yourself out there to create a buzz, right? On the come that, what you're doing is going to do everything that you've said. I think where you cross the line is where you become sort of delusional, right?
Hmm.
I mean, uh, I did not work for her. I
Hmm.
only know all the reports and the documentaries, right, that we've all seen, and the Wall Street Journal story that exposed her.
Hmm.
It got to the point where, I mean, I think she literally was delusional and lying to her funders that this machine, Edison,
Hmm.
could do right, what she said. And then, in fact, when it was installed, I think at Walgreens or in a few locations, right, it failed miserably. Um, and so, there's a line that you
Hmm.
cross, you
Hmm.
know, where you go from creating anticipation of something wonderful, right? And you have to deliver. You have to deliver. And if you can't, then you have to be honest and you have to say, you know, the technology needs continued improvement, or we found in certain cases, right, that this vaccine
Hmm.
doesn't work and hurt people, right? And so, we have to take a step back and do further research before we go forward. And so, like, then you have to ask yourself, would you rather be honest and admit a mistake and take a step back versus keep pushing forward and sort of basically lying and faking it and then risk being exposed, right?
Mm.
Wouldn't you rather be honest and admit a mistake and not go to prison
Right.
than,
That's a,
than keep, lying to people and deceiving them and committing a crime? I mean, as I would take the lesser of two evils, which is,
mm,
being honest. But sometimes, you get so caught up in everything and you just don't see it. And, you think, oh, no, 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 we'll do it. We'll do it. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. And, that's when you need to surround yourself with people who are going to call BS on you and tell you, that you just have to stop.
Interesting. And as so on this idea of make it, don't fake it. So in the era of sensational news, short-lived burst, uh, the idea of getting it viral, the idea of getting it sensationalized, so you get some PR blip in the universe. So how hard it is um, to not get tempted in basically going berserk about your faking it aspect. So what's your take?
on on what? On like when you
Right. So basically, as an industry, so now you know that you would have a very small burst of shelf life when it comes. News is having a smaller shelf life nowadays than it used to, because we are used to this constantly bombardment of dopamine inducing sensational news. So
Mhm.
that means you have to create the sensational impacts pretty quick, and many times realities are boring. Many times the realities, if not told right, could. So what is your take? Like how hard it is today to
Yeah.
stay, as you said, make it, don't fake it. Like how hard it is nowadays compared to maybe 15 years back or 20 years back or 10 years back.
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. Number one, I think today the concept of being honest and operating with integrity is sort of a novelty that, in and of
Mm.
itself,
Mm.
stands out, unfortunately,
And
and is
yeah.
right. And somebody who comes out and says, "Look, you know, this is how it is,
Mm.
and this is reality. This is where we are today, but here is where we're headed." And here are the three things we're going to do. And, we may not like that, but it's the truth. And here's the path forward, right? I think people really want that. And I think it stands out because it's different from what we've been used to. The second thing is that because of the current trend, the wonderful trend towards diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mm.
um, and also because of COVID, there is a very big demand for a sense of belonging and for the word empathy people are using all the time. And, I don't want to belabor that more because everybody's talking about it. I think it comes down to what I call love based marketing as opposed to fear based marketing. And that
Mm.
is that you are in your communication, in your language, in your gestures,
Mm.
uh, in your vocabulary, you reflect how people are feeling. And so they feel that they're being heard and understood and being empathized with, right?
Mm.
And that buying a certain product or buying a certain service will make them feel better. It will
Mm.
make them feel somehow that they belong to what that brand represents, or that they will be happier or feel safer, as opposed to what we've been so accustomed to, which is if we don't do this, bad things are going to happen. If you don't buy this product, if you don't sign up with me, if you don't buy my program, the market's going to crash. You're going to lose all your savings. You're going to lose your home, right? And that's fear based marketing. So I think at the end of the day, you have to have a unique value proposition. You have to offer something that is of value that people will pay money for. and that will work, right? But around that, these are the two things that I think can help cut through the noise.
No, I think so. So one thing I find really fascinating about reading your book was this. I think this idea, as you rightly said, that being honest and being real, being genuine, being love first is such a novelty today that if someone tries to just practice, the very fact that they are practicing makes them stand out pretty. I think so. When I was reading, I said many of the things that many of as us as a business don't say or don't show, which clearly we should, right? If you empathize, if you have that side of your business where you really want to impact change and make someone's life better, being out there and talking about, and even if you're struggling, I think many of I was talking to someone about, so the entire open source community is built around this idea of being vulnerable, being saying, okay, I feel about this problem, do you feel that too, can we collaborate on that problem? So that whole idea of that, no customer would run away, it's such a refreshing thought that if you make yourself vulnerable, sometimes you get this idea that you are the real company that someone
Yeah.
is seeking. So I think that's
Yes.
a fascinating. I definitely loved your book and how it is laying out those golden nuggets,
Yeah.
and it's pretty fascinatingly done.
Well, I thank you. I will say one thing. I was talking to a young woman the other day about my book, and she said, you actually like make me feel like relieved because now I don't have to fake it really. And that faking it is actually wrong. Like it's stressful to fake it
Yeah.
because because you have to think about how you're going to maneuver a situation and manipulate a situation, and it doesn't feel good. So anyway,
I think that's fascinating. So, with that, thank you for walking us through this idea of making it and don't faking it. And so now we're at a section. We call it rapid fire. So
okay,
basically, we want to spend some time in um capturing your thoughts on some areas, and all we require is maybe a word or a one quick sentence of what things that comes out.
love
So
it.
we see what we see, basically mind of a PR.
Okay,
So I'll say a few words and see whatever comes to your mind, and then obviously you can reminiscence all you want. So
okay.
business,
Business. The application of ideas to solve problems that people will pay money for.
entrepreneur,
Hmm. The heartbeat of America.
leadership,
Leadership. Oh, so many definitions. Leadership is the the ability to make the right decision at the right time based on reality for the greater good and often in the face of tremendous change. But it is also the ability to motivate people to achieve a common goal.
culture,
Culture, the soul of a company.
PR nightmare,
Oh, God, where do you want to start? uh, Dolce Gabbana, WeWork, Volkswagen, Boeing, Max, the AstraZeneca, J&J vaccine issues.
things that keep you up at night.
Well, it used to be my employees and my clients. Now it's my dogs. What keeps me up at night is the notion that people think that they can achieve success by faking it, and these are the leaders of tomorrow, of future companies, is something that has to change.
Success,
Success. Um, Success is achieving goals that make a positive difference.
failure,
Failure. Failure is any kind of hate, any kind of hatred and selfishness, um, and not being unkind.
Being authentic.
Sleeping well at night. Being honest and true. Yes, having tough conversations.
Destiny.
Oh, destiny. Destiny is what people will say to us, describe us when we are gone.
That was deep. Make it, don't fake it.
Um, leading with authenticity for real business success.
So that's the true PR in you. It just jumped out. Yes, for the win.
That's my step, baby.
Awesome. So thank you for playing that. So now at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to spend few minutes on you. So
Okay.
we ask all of our guests to share some of the qualities that has helped shape become what they have become. So some of your qualities that has helped you in your success. What would you attribute? What are those qualities?
All right. I would say maybe two or three. I mean, number one would be having options, always developing options, planning for the worst, crisis planning, short-term planning, revising planning. Like, if you don't have any options, you're screwed. You've got to have somewhere to go. So being a good planner and coming up with options is key. And I think the second one is being open-minded and always being curious, sort of destroying fear, uncertainty, and doubt with knowledge and information to be confident and to pick the right door.
Awesome. And we ask all of our guests to share some of the books that has helped them shape become what they have become. Like, what can you share some of your favorite books or any book that you're reading currently? We
Oh,
wonder.
I mean, my one of my most favorite books is by Ben Horowitz, who is a serial entrepreneur and venture partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and he actually wrote two books, but my favorite is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I really love that book. And then I would say Crossing the Chasm from Jeffrey Moore for entrepreneurs and anybody in tech is just like the Bible of go to market strategy. And then Good to Great by Jim Collins. Um, I I really love the message of his book.
Awesome. So one funny story about it's still true. So hard things about hard things. So whenever I go to a bookstore to get a book and I see that book, I pick it up and I put it on the horror section. So I have this. I don't know like why he wrote this is fascinating. I think I agree. If you're an entrepreneur and that's a Stephen it's a horror book. So.
Yeah, I mean, it really spoke to me because it's everything about it is so true.
Mm.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So now, last but not the least, so as a parting thought, if you want something our listeners and viewers to take away from this conversation, what would that be? What would be your closing thought?
Oh well, I think I'll just keep it simple and short. I mean, building a business is the greatest form of self-expression of a lifetime, and it's a wonderful journey. And you want to make it the best journey possible. And my advice is to just always lead with integrity and authenticity, even if it's harder. It's harder to be operating with integrity because it requires you to be dealing with reality, and sometimes reality can be very harsh. But in the end, you'll be much more successful if you operate that way.
I think beautifully put with that, Sabrina. Thank you so much for your time and wish you nothing but success on the book. And to our listeners and viewers, very few times, if you read work coming out from the PR executives and people who have lived their life in the PR world, seldom anyone talk about being authentic and sort of it's always about how to grapple this sensationalist bubble that you can quickly clap around, and many times it sends you in the wrong direction, or maybe
Yes.
more expensive direction that it's very hard to return. So I think it was, what I found fascinating is that in your book is it's still possible to do things in a rational and realistic way, and it's cleaner. It's not as you rightly said, you can sleep easy. So with
Yeah.
that, thank you so much for all you're doing, and couldn't appreciate you enough for the book. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Vishal. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I was homesick, never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick.